When people think of the term pretty girl, they don't typically think of someone who looks like me.
Rain Dove is a non-binary model with 429,000 Instagram followers who regularly appears in adverts for major fashion and beauty brands. This is Rain in an advert for the soap company Dove from 2016, when non-binary representation in adverts was still pretty rare.
People mistake me for being a guy all the time. You don't get to tell me how I need to look. I went to this casting call after losing a bet, and they cast me as a male by...
I see you as a very good-looking man and a very good-looking woman. Like,
Thank
in
you.
both genders, you're very attractive. Was that, like, quite attractive to sort of fashion brands and stuff? Is that how you ended up being a model in the first place?
Actually, at first, it wasn't... it was very taboo. I was the first openly genderless person to be on the cover of a Gaza magazine.
And when was this? What kind of timeline is it really talking?
That would have been 2015.
So it's all very recent.
Yeah, it's pretty
very
recent.
What about instances where corporations use that to push the sale of their product?
Okay, let me tell you something. I have been in almost 10 free-to-be campaigns. And guess what? Their campaigns are always like, at Nike, you're free to be. At Dove, we like to say, you're free to be. Zalando, free to be. Free to be, free to be. As if soap is going to prevent me from walking out the door every day, or like my choice of like sneaker is going to just, change my ability to like exist as a person on the planet.
Are you okay to say that, even given that you were in the advert? Do you
Yeah,
worry that they'll
because
get pissed off?
No, because I'm not. Look, people like to just say that something is good or bad. When all these free-to-be campaigns came out, they came out all within like 3 years. There was a movement for brands to say, we got to start being more human. And as a result, they moved the needle. And they were willing to put their brand on the line to say, we want to show that we are going to accept more people than we did in the past.
But what about the representation of LGBT plus people from more repressive regions of the world who can forget about adverts because they're still fighting to get to where we got in 1861 when we stopped hanging people for who they loved? Andrew Doyle is a comedian and host on GB News who's been gay from way back before it was even cool.
Yeah, well, they can do it now because it's safe and fashionable to do so. I would have liked to have seen corporations flying the rainbow flag back when the age of consent was not equivalent, because that would have been a risk. They could have lost revenue as a result of that, but they could have made a difference in terms of progress. The equivalent today would be, I'd like to see these companies flying the rainbow flag in Saudi Arabia or in Pakistan or in Iran or in their branches in the Middle East, where, again, it might actually make a difference.
During Pride, the biggest tech companies, car manufacturers and more are known for bravely flying the rainbow flag in their Western-facing social media, while their Middle Eastern accounts remain unimpeachably hetero. Rain is alert to this problem. I mean, even someone like Dove presumably wouldn't have put your advert on their Arabian social media,
yeah,
right?
I know. They
Is
still
that a
sell to
problem?
China, and they didn't
Right.
put me in China, right? That's a good, an example.
I guess it's debatable whether Xi Jinping would suddenly go all gay if Dove stopped selling to China and he couldn't get his hands on any more shea butter body wash. Though we've all noticed how much the CCP loves a big parade. Plus, clumsy and performative displays of LGBT solidarity in less progressive countries can backfire on companies. NYU business professor Alison Taylor.
You do need to pay attention to the context. I do think your first obligation ought to be to the human rights of your employees. You do need to protect their safety, protect their security, not, again, make statements that might put them at risk. That is your first obligation. That said, you also need to demonstrate you've got some sort of moral compass and you're not just shifting in the breeze based on who's yelling at you. It's going to depend on how influential that business is in the region. Maybe the government will listen to you if pulling out of that country would seriously damage that country's economy. But maybe you will have very, very limited influence on the Saudi government.
Swatch stores in Malaysia were raided last year when the company launched a collection of Pride flag watches. In return, the Interior Ministry has threatened to jail anyone selling or wearing a rainbow swatch for up to 3 years. So basically, you won't do the crime if you can't tell the time. There's also a question for the organisers of Pride about who they should and shouldn't accept money from. The weapons company BAE Systems has been a major sponsor of Pride festivals across the UK, but they also do business with the homophobic regime of Saudi Arabia, where you can still get your head chopped off for being gay, selling them weapons and surveillance equipment, though absolutely no laser-guided guillotines at all. So, how do you balance supporting gay rights whilst also selling arms to a country that explicitly condemns homosexuality? We got in touch with BAE Systems about their approach to LGBTQ+ rights around the world, and they said,
"We're proud of the steps we've taken to create a sense of belonging for all our employees and to ensure our company is a place where everyone feels respected and valued. Our LGBTQ+ inclusive policies, as well as education and awareness training and health and wellbeing resources for our employees, are led from the top and embedded across all levels of our organisation. Our LGBTQ+ employee network, Outlink, which is sponsored by a member of our executive committee, feeds back to leadership on issues that matter to them, helping our progress towards creating a diverse workforce and providing a nurturing community for thousands of colleagues across the company. Our industry plays a vital role in supporting the UK and its allies to protect citizens and safeguard their freedoms. We'll continue working to be an inclusive organisation with a diverse workforce that reflects the areas we work, whilst recognising our responsibility to comply with the laws of the countries in which we operate."
It's worth bearing in mind that it was illegal to be openly gay in the military until 2000, and the LGBT+ people in the defence sector have a right to make love and war, just like the rest of us. Peter Tatchell.
I've always argued that Pride sponsorship has to have an ethical dimension. We can't just accept money from any business willy-nilly. We have to look at what they do and how they do it. Pride is essentially about human rights, the human rights of LGBT+ people. We're to have consistency and moral authority. We need to be mindful of the human rights of other people as well.
So in the early days of Pride, it was a protest that very few people were brave enough to attend. These days, it's a massive party and everyone and their arms dealer wants an invite. Someone who, even today, knows only too well what Pride feels like as a protest is Rain Dove. They regularly attend Pride in places like Istanbul, where the marches are banned and things are even more hostile than the environment Peter described in the 1970s. Rain distributes body armour to protect LGBT protesters from police who regularly fire tear gas and rubber bullets at them, which can be a bit of a vibe kill.
Now they're shooting. Okay. All right. So we have our first shots fired here.
Recently, Rain received a deluge of messages on social media from people telling them that they shouldn't support Palestine because if they went there, they'd be murdered. Guess what Rain went and did? Only went to Gaza. In the video on their Instagram, you can see footage of the visibly gender non-conforming Rain wearing a trans pride flag as a headscarf and handing out aid to Gazan refugees.
Gaza and Palestinian LGBTQ+ people and their allies will continue to push for their rights over time.
I mean, my goal wasn't to disprove this thing. My thing was like, hey, I'm already going to deliver this aid. I'm going to go and be as open and queer as possible. I'm going to be as loud as possible. And they opened their homes. They were kind to me. There were people also who were queer who came out and talked about their experiences. And the feeling of discomfort that a lot of people express it's very similar to any super religious place.
So who were you wandering around Gaza with? Did you have any security at all, or were you just...
I had a team. I'll say it like that. Some of them worked for NGOs on the ground.
But do we risk, given that it almost certainly is a lot safer in Tel Aviv than it is in downtown Gaza, do we risk, in a sense, all being open to accusations of pinkwashing by going into Gaza and trying to paint a rosier picture than perhaps exists?
Yeah, for sure. People definitely accuse me of going in and washing, and that's why I say you got to listen to the local voices. My voice is very infinitesimal in this. It's important that you have nuance. I know people don't like nuance, but the truth is, like, these people are still fighting for queer liberation, and their voice is the only voice in this, frankly, that matters.
Interesting that while every major brand these days is desperate to jump on any social justice cause at the drop of a hashtag, they've almost all studiously avoided the Israel-Palestine thing like the plague. Maybe we're witnessing the end of corporate woke-washing. Meanwhile, protesters on either side have been frantically accusing each other of woke-washing Hamas or Israel, depending on their political persuasion. But it goes both ways. The Israeli state was recently accused of social media pinkwash for tweeting an image of an IDF soldier standing in the rubble of war-torn Gaza, waving a gay pride flag with the words "In the name of love" written across it. It's worth noting, though, that the flag being waved by the soldier was an older version than the updated one with more stripes that you see at Pride today. Andrew Doyle has strong opinions about the new pride flag and the ideas he believes it represents.
It originally started as 8 stripes, and then it got whittled down to a 6-stripe design. And that prevailed for a number of decades. And when I was growing up, that sign was great, because when I saw that flag, I was like, okay, that's a place where I can go hold my boyfriend's hand. I'm not going to get beaten up. I'm not going to get funny looks. The Progress Pride flag, which now has an extra chevron it has a black stripe and a brown stripe. And then there's now the trans colours in there and the intersex symbol on some versions of the flag. I mean, the whole thing looks like some kind of Jackson Pollock gone wrong. That flag to a lot of gay people represents anti-gay ideas. Gay rights was secured on the understanding that there are some people who are innately attracted to members of their own sex. Now you have a movement that says homosexuality doesn't mean same-sex attracted. It means same-gender attracted. It's very difficult during Pride Month to go into, certainly in London, to go into any restaurant, any sort of high street chain, and not be sort of hectored, to have the Progress Pride flag even on the sort of table mats or flung across the ceiling as bunting.
But how representative is your point of view in the gay community?
Well, I don't know any gay people who think that the Progress Pride flag represents them today. I don't know any. It's really difficult to say. Oh, I'm called a transphobe all the time, but I've never felt any animosity whatsoever towards trans people. It doesn't really make sense to me.
Activist Peter Tatchell.
People are entitled to disagree with new, revised, updated pride flag, but most people in our community support it because we want to recognise all the different aspects and dimensions of our community. And I don't think that corporations should hold back supporting trans rights just because a tiny minority within our community object to it. Of course, there is a need for a considered, thoughtful, calm and polite debate and discussion about some of the concerns raised by some critics who are not hateful of trans people but are concerned about women's spaces and so on. That's entirely legitimate, but it's no excuse to blanket remove support for trans people. When big corporations support trans rights, they're sending a signal to the wider society and their consumers that they are an inclusive company, that trans people are welcome. And given the degree of social hostility against trans people, that symbolic gesture is hugely important.
For people like Peter, the objection to corporate whitewash is that companies hypocritically don't live up to the ideas they proclaim to champion. But Andrew represents another section of society that objects to big business forcing an ideology upon them that they don't necessarily agree with. The debate around transgender rights is at the heart of all of this, and corporations that wade in are often falling foul of this bitter culture war. One notable recent example is American beer Bud Light. It all begins last year when Dylan Mulvaney, a trans influencer and model, appeared in a promotional Instagram video for Bud Light, which is an offshoot of Budweiser, popular with blue-collar American workers and owned by Anheuser-Busch InBev.
This month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it.
Here's their marketing executive, Alyssa Heinerscheid, on a podcast just before the storm broke.
This brand is in decline. It's been in decline for a really long time. And if we do not attract young drinkers to come and drink this brand, there will be no future for Bud Light.
Mulvaney's post was picked up by a number of conservative figures with large online followings like Ben Shapiro.
Well, folks, our entire culture has now decided men are women, women are men, and you must be forced to consume product that says so.
And Trump-supporting redneck Bono Kid Rock, who filmed himself shooting up crates of the beer with an assault rifle in protest.
Have a terrific day.
An online boycott took off. Conservative politicians, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, were quick to join the anti-woke uprising.
We're going to be launching an inquiry about Bud Light.
Another voice that openly criticised the company for hiring Mulvaney was Caitlyn Jenner, member of the Kardashian dynasty and also a trans woman. Caitlyn argued that putting Mulvaney in the ads was akin to forcing ordinary Americans to accept a particular set of ideas about society that they may not agree with. The boycott blew up, and boy did it hit the company hard. There was a 10% drop in AB InBev's revenue, and it was forced to hand back $1 billion to its shareholders. Mulvaney hasn't appeared in a Bud Light ad since, and in the autumn, AB InBev tried to court back some bros by announcing a $100 million sponsorship deal with the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Because nothing says straight like two sweaty guys in their underpants rolling around on the floor. We wrote to AB InBev and Dylan Mulvaney, but both declined to comment. In the days following the backlash, their CEO stated, "We never intended to be part of a discussion that divides people. We're in the business of bringing people together over a beer." If you can call it that. activist, model, and occasional BBC studio table thumper, Rain Dove.
Budweiser stood for masculinity, American ideals, the simplicity of what it means to enjoy a beer. It's no frills, nothing. It's Budweiser, man.
But then, no other brewer makes the king of beers.
It's the king of beers. It's the king, not the queen. It's not the woman of beers, the trans woman of beers. And you're telling me that you're going to bring a trans woman into my king of beers? We are stoked that anyone wants to change and open their doors. But the people who have come to know this brand as like being one thing since they were born 50 years ago, suddenly there's a different mascot. They're like, everything's changing. My life is different, and I don't know what this means.
Rain may have survived in Gaza as a gay person, but I doubt they'd expect to be made the face of a Palestinian hummus brand. Maybe we're all learning that softly, softly, catchy wokey is the surest route to progress. Alison Taylor.
These issues weren't really whipping up the public for a long time. More recently, elements of the right wing have understood they can cause a lot of angst by whipping up these boycotts on these topics.
So has clumsy corporate identity politics, jet fueled by social media, inflamed the divisions between us? Activist Peter Tatchell. As we're all sort of balkanised these days in terms of our identity, in terms of our opinions, more and more and more, we're all becoming sort of hyper-focused on our own issue or issues. And doesn't that kind of make us all vulnerable to this type of thing?
Identity politics was a necessary counterattack against the way in which issues around sex, race, and sexual orientation and gender identity were being marginalised by the mainstream. But the big problem with identity politics is it sometimes loses an understanding of our common humanity.
Maybe the biggest problem of our age is that social media has convinced us all, from the biggest corporations to the most insignificant Radio 4 presenter, that we all need to have an opinion all the time about everything. Maybe some corporations do care about profit over progress, but they also help make Pride a massive global party. And maybe a big old rave up where everyone's invited is the best way to forget our differences and find some common ground.
Whenever something becomes big, it no longer is monolithic. It means something different to different people.
So it's sort of a victim of its own success, really.
It's a victim of its own success. It needs to be as diverse in expectation and service as its own community is. There is a place for Pride to be a party, and there's also a place for Pride to be a march.